Here's what we do when we go over stuff with the book. We don't do a whole, okay, let's talk about every single event that happened. Normally we spend roughly about 2 days going over each chunk or so that we read, depending on what's happening with it, and I'll explain why we got the map up there in a moment. But we don't run through like every single little event that happened. The hope is by us running through events in the book, and you won't have your books out because we'll probably take over page numbers. The hope is it gives you at least a better way of looking at the book and maybe being able to kind of fine tune some ideas and things that you have for it. I usually have some points that I want to discuss, but I'll usually start with you folks throwing things out, because a lot of times stuff that I want to talk about, you have questions about anyway, and then we're able to kind of put all that stuff together. So we'll get to questions here in a moment. I had the map of Africa up here just to kind of give you a point of reference of what's going on with it. Most of the book obviously is taking place in Africa, in the Congo, in the heart of darkness. Congo River is this part that we have right here, which isn't highlighting yet. I'm sure eventually we'll get there, maybe. There it is. So that's Congo River, where Marlowe's trip starts up with the company is going to be in Europe, which isn't visible on the map. He then has to make his trip out. And within the Congo, on the river, there's 3 main areas that he is at, and I'm just putting like rough locations for him. What's the first station that he has to stop at? That was like my question. There's 3 different stations. What would be some names for them? Not first, second, and third. This is a bad way to start. Where's Kurtz? Kurtz is located in the inner station. He has just barely arrived at inner station by the end of part 2. He's in the central station. Central station is where there's the station manager, the brickmaker. Inner station is where the Russian, who he meets at the very end, would be, the Russian trader. The first place that he goes is outer station. Outer station is where there is the accountant, who's always dressed in white. Outer station is when he first learns of Kurt. So the majority of the book, he's in here. From a time point reference, keep in mind it is a lengthy journey. So he starts in Europe. He mentions that it takes him 30 days to get from Europe to the mouth of the big river. So he has basically a month journey. He's in the outer station for a couple days. Then he has a 200-mile hike to Central Station. He's not actually going on the river. He's hiking to Central Station. That takes him 15 days. He arrives at Central Station, and there's a problem. What's his big problem? The boat's underwater. How long is it going to take him to repair the boat? It's about 3 months that he is stuck in Central Station, and then he has this trip that he's going to go to Interstation. So for the amount of time that he's discussing for his trip in the Congo, you have about 4.5, 5 months has elapsed. So this isn't like a 2-day trip that he's talking about. You know, especially when he's in Central Station waiting for rivets, he's there twiddling his thumbs, putzing around for a while with absolutely nothing to do. So from a timeline standpoint, again, this has nothing to do with the opening of the book, which we can get into, but he's looking at about a 4.5, 5 month trip, and then he's going to have to come home, you know, once the whole entire thing is done. So at least kind of lets you know where he's at. But outer station, Central Station, inner station, those are the main places that most of the events are taking place with. So what do we have for specific questions, issues, things of that nature? Doesn't mean Emma has to start us off, unless she wants to.
Is it okay if it's not a question about like plot?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why would Conrad write in like a narrator listening to Marlowe tell the story instead of just Marlowe's story?
The way that the book is actually structured.
Yeah.
the structure of the book is referred to as what's called a frame tale, which kind of makes sense when you think about how it works. When the book literally opens, where are we, or what's happening? We're on the Thames River. Where's the Thames River? It's in England. It's flowing through London. Okay. So when the book opens, we're on the ship. What's the name of the boat? The Nelly. My favorite Heart of Darkness essay ever was about this guy named Nelly, who was on this trip to find Kurtz and met a guy named Marlowe. It was a fascinating essay.
Who wrote it?
Someone long ago in a galaxy far, far away. I think I remember, but I'm not 100% sure. No relatives in the room, so that's good. All right, so it starts on the Thames River. So on the Thames River, on the Nelly, you know, this is where we have our unnamed narrator. I always want that to kind of be like a quiz question. Who narrates the book? Half people will say Marlowe. The other half will get it right, say unnamed narrator. But you got the narrator, you have the lawyer, you have an accountant, you have Marlowe sitting like a Buddha character telling his story. But you have all this stuff happening. So primarily, you have Marlowe recounting the events. From a literary device, because Marlowe is telling a story, basically kind of like as it occurs from the past, really the tale is one big, because you're in the present talking about the past. Flashback. So 99% of the story is really this flashback. What you then have surrounding it, and I know, Josh, your question was why, which we haven't gotten to yet, but it's basically framed then by this unnamed narrator. So the narrator is primarily at the beginning of the book. He also certainly reappears at the end of the book, which we're not there yet, so it makes it kind of tough to talk about it. And then every now and then, you know, Marlowe will be telling a story, and then you like, and the boat rocked. You're like, wait a minute, what boat? Oh, that's right, we're back on the Nelly on the Thames River. Marlowe, stop, you know, why'd you have to say that? I don't know. And then he goes back into the story again. So the majority of the book certainly is going to be Marlowe. Significant question was asked, well, what's the point of having a frame tale? What, if anything, does this add? I'm not trying to turn the question around onto you. Can you think of any reasons why you might want to do something like that? Because you could have written Heart of Darkness as Marlowe, you know, I'm on this boat, we're on the Thames, then I told them my story, and you would get through to it, and the majority of the book would be unchanged. What kind of happens from a perspective standpoint? Possibly.
I mean, if more had happened with the actual narrator, then it might have made sense. But like, also, you can skip large chunks. I mean, but you could do this in a story that's not framed, where you can, since it's flashback, you can skip larger chunks of time.
Mm-hmm.
Since it's like, oh, I'm telling like the relevant parts of the story.
You have the ability to kind of manipulate time and setting a little bit as needed. Yeah, I would agree with that one. Emma?
I think it kind of makes it easier to like make the reader not as connected to the storyteller, because the narrator is the one who's directly telling you the story. It's Marlowe, and the narrator tells you that not everyone on the boat is interested about a story, so maybe that makes
Or at least not the way that he seems to be telling it and all that kind of stuff. So there's a little bit, if anything, of a buffer between you and Marlowe. It still kind of makes Marlowe, if Marlowe were the narrator, you know, say first-person narrator, and this isn't always the case, but typically if Marlowe is the first-person narrator, you probably have a better idea of his whole mindset, what's going in, like with his thoughts. You don't get that. You get Marlowe telling his story, and there's still some things where you certainly get some insight to it, but you don't necessarily know always his reaction or his viewpoint. Case in point, the prompt that you did yesterday, and obviously we'll talk about it in more detail tomorrow. What's the main subject matter of yesterday's passage? Like the passage was primarily about Kurtz. Then you had to characterize Kurtz. And so it's how does, learning devices that Marlowe uses to characterize Kurtz. And there wasn't like one type of characterization that you had to use. So, if one person said he's greedy, another person is characterized as being corrupt, another person he's characterized as being an important figure, all those things could certainly be correct. It's not that why'd you pick that? That was bad. If he was characterized, I guess, as like a jokester and a really funny guy, we could have some issues with that one. No one went that route. I mean, he made the wilderness laugh, so he must be pretty humorous. That would not be a good response to do. No one did that. Yes, that's happened before too. Knowing what we know about the plot, why is it odd that Marlowe would go into such detail about Kurtz in that particular passage? Like, I kind of hope that some of you were kind of caught off guard when reading the book when that passage appears. For a simple fact. We haven't met the guy. You're going into a whole big description about this person who we haven't even seen yet. What gives? And we don't know really why Marlowe did that. Going back to Emma's point, as there's a little bit of a buffer, kind of between us and the reader, we don't really know exactly how Marlowe feels about Kurtz. You can tell he recognizes that he's probably kind of become corrupt and greedy, yet at the same time, there seems to be this, wow. He's like, Kurtz. This aura, this reverence that's going for him, and we have no idea why he really feels that way. So in one regard, I think it still makes it a little bit more mysterious, as to what is it about Kurtz that traps him so much. What it also does, and I think this will be a little bit easier to certainly understand by the time we get done with the story, is if the story were strictly Marlowe telling his account, we could look at how are we as the reader affected by it. What did we think about his subject matter at the beginning? What do we think about his subject matter at the end of his story? By adding this extra layer, what can we also kind of compare and contrast when we're done with the story? We can compare how the narrator feels at the beginning of the story versus how he feels at the end, where you kind of then get maybe a better sense as to, okay, how is that supposed to make me feel? I know we don't know a whole lot about the narrator. Is there anything we do know about the narrator based on like where he is mentally, what he thinks about things, at the beginning of the book? And you can literally just go to page 65. Any sense as to narrator's thoughts and feelings towards anything within the first couple pages? I was confused by the third paragraph. Mr. King. How do you expect me to answer this question?
I mean, he feels bonded to the other people on board.
Okay. Yeah, there's like a camaraderie that's kind of going on at this point, and we don't really know everything about the ship. We know it's part of like dealing with the company. We have the director of companies was our captain and our host, but we don't really know a whole lot of what's going on. Take a look at bottom of 66. Forthwith, a change came over the waters, and the serenity became less brilliant but more profound. The old river and its broad reach rested unruffled at the decline of day. After ages of good service done to the race that peopled its banks, spread out in the tranquil dignity of a waterway leading to the uttermost ends of the earth. We look at the venerable stream, not in the vivid flush of a short day that comes and departs forever, but in the august light of abiding memories. You get any kind of tone from the narrator so far? Serenity, less brilliant but more profound. Ages of good service done to the race, tranquil dignity of a waterway.
prideful in everything they do.
Yeah, like this.
Impressed.
We're on the Thames River. This is one of the great places of the world. And indeed, nothing is easier for a man who has, and like national pride, I think would be something to kind of go along with that as well, as that's going to continue to go here, as a man who, as the phrase goes, followed the sea with reverence and affection, than to evoke the great spirit of the past upon the lower reaches of the Thames. The tidal current runs to and fro in its unceasing surface, crowded with memories of men and ships that bore the rest of home, or to the battles of sea. It had known and served all the men of whom the nation is proud. And this would kind of add to Grant's point. Sir Francis Drake to Sir John Franklin, knights all titled and untitled, the great knights errant of the sea. Anyone know Drake and Franklin?
For Drake, yeah.
Was he the first one to make it all the way?
This is the second. I think Magellan was the first.
Oh yeah.
I think he's the first though to do it in one full continual voyage.
Yeah.
So yeah, proud history behind him. Forget the fact that he was a slave trader. That's unimportant when you're looking at it from history's eyes. Sir John Franklin later, because Drake's like 15 to. Drake is Elizabethan era, contemporary of the guy on the wall, Shakespeare. Franklin is a little bit more recent. He's known for his explorations of the North Pole Arctic Circle. They all died of starvation when the boat got sunk, but we're still proud of him. So you're making allusions to famous people and all this kind of stuff that's going on. So there's a lot of pride that's taking in. Look at everything that all this great river has done. The first words, like 2/3 of the way down 67. And this also, said Marlowe suddenly, has been one of the dark places of the earth. There's a big contrast there that goes into it. And Marlowe essentially goes into what has happened on the Thames River. The Romans came in. They came into this dark area. There was a bunch of uncivilized brutes. They had to get in battles with them and basically conquer it. Can you imagine how horrible that would have been? Some centurion just simply trying to get through the day and having to battle the Gauls and the Celts and all that kind of stuff in this really dark place. Oh, by the way, I went to the Congo once. So the mood between, the narrator is, this place is great. Now you have Marlowe going in this more serious, this too was one of the dark places, by the way. What's the name of the book? So the assumption is that Heart of Darkness is certainly going to be in this area down here, but he's kind of setting up that maybe there's a little bit more meaning to it than just that trip. In the Congo, from a historical standpoint, we refer to that as the age of new imperialism. What's basically happening in imperialism? You have, quote unquote, civilized countries going where? Into uncivilized, primitive areas and taking it over. What's the first thing that Marlowe mentions really about the Thames River? Roman Empire, civilized empire, came into one of the dark places of the earth to take it over. You have this parallel that's basically kind of starting to set up with what is going on in current imperialism versus what was happening in the past. So it's still an unanswered question, Josh, to your original point, but how does the narrator feel after listening to Marlowe's story? That'll be something to kind of keep an eye on at the end. If there is a shift in his viewpoint, then I think we get a stronger message as to what is it that Conrad's trying to get across with it. What else? Again, it can be plot questions, it can be this seemed kind of important when it happened, but I don't know what's going on.
Yeah. What was the deal, I think it was the uncle who said, Kurtz is sick or something, but then he wasn't, so.
Well, and we're getting bits, and we haven't still met Kurtz yet. We're getting so many little bits of information that are coming in at this point. One thing to know is that in part 3, you will meet Kurtz. I pinky swear that he will show up, that he will be there. Without him being there now, he's still certainly an integral part of the book because he kind of seems to be a bit of motivation as to going on. But when it comes to Kurtz, And we don't know a whole lot about him, obviously. The most that we probably know would be from the prompt that you had yesterday, some of those details. You have a lot of different viewpoints towards people that the people have towards him. If you take a look at Marlowe, how would you, and again, we're just going with bits of detail, fragments of information, how does Marlowe seem to feel about Kurtz? Let's still guess at this point. How does he seem to feel? Doesn't mean they have to be besties, doesn't mean they're arch enemies. I would say it's fair to say that Marlowe is very kind of what by Kurtz, might be a way of putting it.
I was gonna say he admires him.
But could be some admiration. I don't know. Impressed, which would go along with it. I would say at the very least, I'm pretty curious, fascinated to meet this guy. Assuming that he hasn't met him yet, but we still have that whole description of, oh, by the way, when I did meet him, this is what I saw, kind of thing. So there does, at the very least, seem to be some admiration, and I would kind of add to it a sense of intrigue. Intrigue would probably be the current feeling. Admiration would be part of the feeling that he has after meeting him, which is just weird since they haven't met yet before. You mentioned the uncle. Who's he the uncle to?
I wrote this down.
He's the manager's uncle. The manager is the guy at Central Station. Okay, so the middle one, the place where the boat is sunk. So you have the manager at Central, and you have the uncle. Anyone pick up on their viewpoint towards him? And you're right, talking about Kurtz being ill. That's a correct detail. How do they feel towards him? They don't like him at all. They despise him. And a lot of that would have to do with jealousy. I think that would be an accurate thing. What do we know about Kurtz? So far as how productive he is, that guy gets more ivory than anyone else. How does he do it? I have no idea. He just gets more ivory than anyone else, basically seems to be the point about it. Who's very impressed by the amount of ivory that Kurtz keeps pumping out? And this is the guy who really kind of introduces Marlowe to him.
The accountant.
Not the clerk accountant. The guy at the first station who wears all white all the time, looks the part of the aristocracy, he's very European looking and all that stuff. The accountant, who doesn't really know much about him, he would be extremely impressed by Kurtz. When you meet him, tell him I said hi. I think he's wonderful. And it makes sense that why would the accountant be impressed with him? He's an accountant. What can Kurtz do more than anyone else? Hey, that money stuff, that's pretty impressive. So the manager and the uncle certainly say, and as the story progresses, would even say kind of do some things that kind of illustrate their spite and the jealousy that they have for him. One of the things that gets mentioned is he's ill. If he's ill, then it's time for him to go. Because if he goes, what happens to them? They move up the ladder. Station manager, uncle. I'd say in Central Station there's another guy who's pretty much a bumbling idiot. But there's not a whole lot of people that get mentioned in the book, and the fact that he does get mentioned is significant.
The first building that he went into at segmentation, the guy who was managing, he wasn't on a job.
Nope. What's it? Do you remember what his job is? And it's at Central Station. It's not in her yet. He's a maker. He's the brick maker. Except Marlowe doesn't see any bricks. So he seems to be a fool, idiot, just kind of bumbling around. He too is kind of jealous of Kurtz, but later is like, but tell him I said hi, you know, kind of like the way the accountant does. That, you know, I didn't mean all those things that I said about him. How does the brickmaker feel about Kurtz? Just like the station manager, he's jealous. He's jealous that Kurtz gets all this recognition, the brickmaker doesn't get anything. Now we would look at it as to, well, why should the brickmaker get any recognition if the brickmaker does absolutely nothing? You know, you don't do your grades of rap essay. Why did Megan get a better grade?
Yeah.
Because she did the essay. So, I still like know stuff. Yeah, but she didn't do anything, Jesse. It doesn't matter. I could have if I really wanted to. I'm just as good. I should get a gold star too. No, you shouldn't. So, Marlowe looks at him as being a fool because he doesn't do anything. There's jealousy that he kind of has where he wants to move up the chain of command without really wanting to do anything. And not that we're talking about, you know, your generation, but we're going to talk about your generation. How do stuffy old adults like me look at kids like you?
Soft.
That's right.
You said it in
I
second
did.
grade, yeah.
You people are soft, want like early dismissals just because it's warm outside. Emma's like, I'm so hot wearing her hoodie and your cardigan here, like, let us home. Well, then dress appropriately. Sense of, adults say this all the time. You people have such a sense of entitlement. You want stuff without deserving it. That would kind of be the brickmaker. So there's a lot of confusion as to why in the world would this person, you know, think he should deserve something. And you take a look at this whole imperialistic operation, if anything, you could look that this whole thing is very much chaotic, which doesn't make sense if it's supposed to be a model of efficiency, of civilization, European civilization at its finest, going into the Congo and making things better than before. These people have no clue what they're doing. And so part of that outward appearance of the accountant being dressed in white, that everything is prim and proper the way it should be, the white man's burden, the missionary zeal, you know, stuff that you were taking a look at with the notes that you did over the weekend. One of the things that Marlowe is kind of proving here is looks can be deceiving. It's not really maybe the way that folks would kind of expect it to be. Kurtz does seem to be ill. We don't know a whole lot about it. We do know a physical description of him, based from yesterday. He's impressively all white, which, you know, he's kind of been consumed by wilderness. You know, I was patting him in my head while you were taking a look at the personification. From a symbolic standpoint, what's the big ticket item that he's extracting from the Congo? Ivory. You know, he's basically becoming almost like one with the ivory. Illness. Okay, there's some kind of sickness going on with him. What kind of illness is expected to happen to Europeans as they go into the Congo? Malaria being one, and this, because Conrad knows about this because he has it. So there's a physical ailment, and then there's also a mental ailment that would be expected to happen. And I think the encounter with the doctor that he had before the trip would be an example of this. Part of the physical is his, the circumference of his brain, of his head. What's expected to happen? So the way you could have like a baseline concussion test, let's take a baseline of Alex's head, let's measure it, send him down into the Congo, he comes home, the expectation is it's going to be smaller. He's going into a primitive area, quotation marks for primitive area. Insanity could happen there, so his mental capacities would shrink, which means his brain would shrink. Is that really going to happen? No, but that's part of the European stereotype that would be taking place at the time. How does Marlowe, his aunt certainly helps him get the job, but why does the company need a captain? He's going after the name, he's going after the chief of the stick because they're having a dispute over two hens. Why would you attack a chief over two hens? And he's described, Freslevin, as being very docile, very calm, pragmatic, and he goes crazy. So that, aura of insanity kind of starts to build up. So That illness, that sickness is something that we're going to look at. Is it mental? Is it physical? Is it kind of a combination of both? And you could even kind of argue maybe the same thing about Marlowe. If the stories of Kurtz are true, that he did make a deal with the devil, he eats of the devils of the land. Well, what kind of person would admire a man like Kurtz? You can make the argument only a crazy person would admire someone like that. What's the brickmaker have of Kurtz's? And this is where some of those symbolic images start to appear. In the brickmaker's office, he has one thing. Kurtz did this about a year ago. There's a painting, a picture. What's the painting? She has a torch, blindfolded woman, which right there you have a little bit of a paradox taking place. If you have a woman holding a torch, you would expect that that torch would be there so you can see, yet she is blindfolded. Know any ladies holding torches? Statue of Liberty. Justice, freedom. What is justice and freedom? What happens to it in the jungle? Gone. Can't see. Blind justice. What does Europe really know about what's happening within the jungle? Probably very little. So, you kind of start to get this symbolic sense of justice, liberty, freedom, democracy, is blind. Anyone know where Marlowe goes for the company headquarters? Because he has to go to the company offices, which is in a city that he makes reference to on page 73. Except he doesn't give us the name of the city. But he says he goes to that city on page 73 that always reminds him, it's in that first full paragraph, John, I think.
It says I arrived in a city that always makes me think of a whited sepulcher.
Yep. Anyone know and you'll hear both pronunciations, sepulcher or sepulcher. Sepulcher is the correct one technically, but we mutilate it. Me too. Anyone know what a sepulcher is? Sepulcher is a monument. More specifically, typically it is a tomb. It's a whited sepulcher because what would be on the outside, not ivory, but generally marble. Whited sepulcher itself is a phrase that gets used, and I know we're not in CCD class, so no pressure here. Whited sepulcher is a phrase that gets used in the New Testament. I think it's in the book of Matthew when Jesus is calling out the Pharisees, calls them hypocrites, and says, "You're nothing but whited sepulchres, beautiful on the outside, but inside full of only dust and bones." You look good, but at the heart, there's really nothing there. What city would he be in if he's in the Belgian Congo? What city would be where the company headquarters would be? It would probably be the only city that most of us can name that's within Belgium. Be Brussels. So he never says Brussels, but you get the assumption that he's in Brussels. He's at the company headquarters. So he refers to Brussels as like this tomb where basically you're going to look the part, but what's really happening in the Congo? Death, destruction, despair. You should have had or could have had a Tale of Two Cities flashback when he first walked into the office, because he sees the two old women doing what? Knitting, which you kind of recognize possibly as allusion to French the Fates. And what kind of string are they pulling and cutting? It's not white string, but it is black. Because who are the people who are suffering? They would be the natives in the Congo as the company is going in. Lives are being exterminated for the benefit of Europe. So we'll talk about this a little bit more tomorrow. We'll take a look at your essays tomorrow.